To those who fall asleep thinking about forgotten kings and dusty calendars, this one's for you. Tonight we're cracking open one of humanity's oldest puzzles, right there in the dust of ancient Mesopotamia. A hot, humming city made of mud brick and myth. The place? Ulika. The time? About 4,600 years ago. The mood, somewhere between divine destiny and I've got half an hour to kill before the ziggurat meeting. You're standing in the shade of a crumbling wall as someone squats near the corner of a courtyard, scratching small squares into packed earth with a reed stylus. A handful of pebbles sits beside them. A few friends gather, curious, and just like that, play begins. You watch, unsure what you're seeing at first. Is it math? A map? A secret spell? But the way they gesture, point, laugh, there's rhythm here, movement, turns. The grid becomes a stage, the pebbles, actors, and you realize it's a game, not a training exercise or a sermon or a punishment, but a deliberate act of play. And somehow, that makes it more human than anything else you've seen all day. So, before you get too cozy, take a second to like and subscribe, only if this kind of calm storytelling is your thing. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing how global our little bedtime history gang is. All right, time to dim the lights, settle in, and if you like, let a fan hum gently in the background. Let's slip quietly into tonight's story. You squint past the courtyard into the wide, sun-flattened streets of Ur. The air smells like clay, sweat, and dates. You can hear a merchant hawking barley cakes down the block and the occasional whinny of a donkey. Children dart through the alleys barefoot. But over in this quiet nook, something else is taking shape. A moment of leisure in a world built mostly on labor. Board games, you'll find, are not a modern luxury. They're not some invention that sprang up during rainy weekends and suburban basements. They're ancient, older than the Iliad, older than the concept of weekends, maybe older than shoes. And here in Sumeria, where every brick has to be sun-baked and every god has 3 jobs, the idea of sitting still and playing almost feels like a kind of rebellion. The board they're scratching into the dirt isn't the finished product. The real deal will be carved into wood or ivory, inlaid with lapis lazuli, given pride of place in someone's home, or maybe buried in their grave. But this is the prototype. A game in beta. Maybe it'll become something famous. Maybe it'll just keep 2 brothers from arguing over who gets the bigger half of a pomegranate. You watch the pieces move. The rules are vague, maybe even improvised, but there's something deliberate in the way they interact. You notice the younger player keeps checking the sky, muttering when they roll a certain number. Is it luck or something deeper? In Sumer, chance was never just chance. Every toss of a knucklebone might carry divine implications. And that's your first hint. These games weren't always just games. Historians still argue whether the earliest Sumerian games were purely recreational or if they were bound up in spiritual practice. Maybe both, maybe neither. Maybe sometimes a board was a portal to the divine, and sometimes it was just a way to make your cousin cry in front of his crush. But what's clearer is this. In the cradle of civilization, amid irrigation systems and moon calendars, the human need to play found a way to slip in. Some scholars think it was boredom, others say stress. One even suggested that in a society ruled by rigid class and cosmic fear, games gave people a tiny simulation of freedom, a space where a servant could, for one afternoon, beat a noble fair and square without getting flayed. You wander past a temple wall etched with prayers and end up in another courtyard. This one's quieter. A single older man sits with a lacquered board in front of him. The pieces are finely carved. He's not playing, just staring. Maybe he's remembering someone, a brother, a wife, a child. Or maybe he's waiting for the gods to make the next move. Fringe tidbit. One 4,000-year-old board was found with a small offering bowl nearby, suggesting that people might have left food or incense to improve their odds. Or maybe the spirits were just really into snacks. There's something strangely moving about all of it. In a world that recorded every barley shipment and goat birth, the games left behind feel lighter, not unimportant, just human, like doodles in the margin of an ancient scroll. And as you step back into the dusty street, you realize something else. We haven't really changed. We still crave stories with rules, chaos we can organize, a universe that fits on a board and lets us pretend, for a moment, that we're in control. That feeling? It started here. You stretch your legs a little, shuffle past a goat chewing something suspicious, and follow the scent of burnt barley until it brings you to another household. Modest, flat-roofed, with reed mats drying in the sun. There's a lull here, a stillness that doesn't feel accidental. No hammering, no hauling, no shouting about taxes. Just stillness. It's the off-season. This is where it begins to click. In Sumeria, where the calendar is half-planned around floods and sun gods, life happens in pulses. You plant, you wait, you tally harvests, then tally debts. You write contracts, and then hope nobody breaks them. Much of Sumerian life was laborious, yes, but it also came with long pauses. Not vacation, not leisure, just enforced stillness. And in those pockets of nothing, you needed something to fill the space between chores and prayers. You step through the open door and see a small family curled together on a mat. A wide-eyed child is setting up pieces on a carved board, and two elders lean in, arguing about whether the left tile counts as a safe space. It's immediately familiar, suspiciously familiar. You're watching the ancestors of modern game night. It turns out, the invention of board games may have had more to do with logistics than larks. Farming created surplus. Surplus created class. Class created boredom, or at least moments of unused time for certain people. And those people? They started fiddling with pebbles. Historians still argue whether board games first emerged from temples, homes, or even administrative buildings, because yes, it's possible that games began as training tools for accounting. Nothing says fun like calculating grain distributions using colored markers and probability. But however it started, the need was clear. Brains needed structure, even when bodies were idle. And Sumerians were good at structure. This was the culture that standardized weights and measures, developed one of the first writing systems, and made sure everyone knew exactly how many goats they owed the high priest by Tuesday. But structure alone doesn't soothe the soul. That's where the gods came in. Or maybe didn't. See, Sumerian gods were not what you'd call chill. They didn't love you unconditionally. They didn't reward good behavior in straightforward ways. They were, frankly, a little dramatic. They flooded your fields, then demanded cookies. They struck you with boils, and then expected poems. And all of it, your crops, your fate, your child's cold, was because you'd made some divine being slightly cranky. In that kind of world, predictability becomes comfort food. And board games, these tidy, rule-bound microcosms, offered a weird kind of safety. Within the grid of squares or a spiral of tiles, you knew where you stood. You knew what the dice meant. You knew that moving a piece 3 spaces forward had a result. It wasn't divine whim. It was your turn. You hear a clatter. Behind you, the child from before has knocked the board over mid-tantrum. The parents sigh. You smile. Some things really don't change. Fringe tidbit? Some scholars suggest that Sumerians might have even staged public game tournaments, mini-spectacles where priests, nobles, and commoners could spectate or place bets. Imagine a cross between a chess match and a WWE promo, but with more linen and less suplexing. Outside, the breeze picks up. The reeds sway. Somewhere, a dog is barking at a mud wall. You start to notice it more now. The leftover grids scratched onto sun-baked steps. Little carved cubes nestled in pottery shards. Patterns of movement that feel intentional. You're walking through a city that, despite its monumental architecture and mathematical achievements, still made room for play. Historians still argue whether this play was encouraged by religious leaders or merely tolerated. Some temple texts hint at strict behavior codes. Others seem to wink and nudge, like an old scribe slipping a pun into a tax record. But what's undeniable is this. Once the board appeared, people didn't stop using it. They adapted it, decorated it, buried it with their dead. They made rules, broke them, rewrote them. They passed them down. You return to the family inside, and the board's back in place. The child rolls first. The piece moves. The game begins again. And outside, the world continues. Chaotic, divine, unpredictable. But here, for now, the rules are known. You follow a winding alley that smells faintly of river mud and fermented fish until you reach a home that looks nicer. Not palace nice, but definitely upper tier. A merchant, maybe. Or a mid-level priest who isn't above skimming a few jars of date syrup from temple offerings. Either way, someone with means. Inside, things are laid out carefully. Carved furniture, decorative bowls, a curtain of dyed linen swaying gently in the doorway. And in the center of the main room, resting on a woven mat, is something remarkable. A game board, not scratched into dirt, not cobbled from pebbles and guesswork. This one gleams. It's wooden, inlaid with shell, lapis lazuli, and red limestone. The design is strange, interlocking rows of small squares, rosette motifs scattered across the path, and next to it sit small, triangular pieces. They look like little pyramids, carved carefully by someone with a lot of time and a very sharp knife. This is the royal game of and it's not just a game, it's an artifact, a mystery, a message in 12 squares that survived for more than 4 millennia. You crouch beside it as 2 players begin. One mutters a prayer under their breath before rolling 4-sided dice made from knuckle bones. The other watches, deadpan. You get the sense this is more than friendly competition. Historians still argue whether the royal game of was played strictly for fun, for ritual, or as a form of divination. Some surviving instructions suggest point systems and re-rolls. Others lean toward omen reading and symbolic movement. In some burials, the game board appears alongside amulets and protective charms, as if ensuring a safe passage through the afterlife. That's right. Winning might have literally meant eternal reward. You look again at the board. Each step feels loaded now. Is this a race? A metaphor for the soul's journey? A cosmic tug-of-war between fate and free will? Fringe tidbit? In 177 BC, a Babylonian scribe wrote out a version of the rules on a clay tablet, complete with instructions on which throws bring misfortune and which spaces must not be entered on a Tuesday unless you've already sneezed twice. Okay, not exactly that, but close. Mesopotamian superstition went deep. The pieces clatter as one player rolls again, landing on a square with a rosette. They pump their fist. You don't need to speak Sumerian to understand victory gloating. The other player sighs dramatically, turns to a bystander and starts loudly theorizing about cursed dice. The eternal tradition of sore losers begins here. As the game continues, you notice the shift in atmosphere. This isn't just amusement, it's performance. Strategy, sure, but also storytelling. Each piece on the board moves like a character in a play. There's drama, suspense, triumph, a beginning, a middle, and sometimes an excruciatingly slow end when someone keeps missing the final roll. And here's the clever part. The board teaches. The royal game, like many early games, is essentially a race with obstacles. It rewards patience, punishes greed, and adds just enough luck to keep players humble. You could say it models life, especially Sumerian life, where advancement often depended on a mix of skill, connections, and not angering the wrong god on the wrong day. You watch a final roll. The last piece lands. The losing player offers a sarcastic clap and the winner grins like they just overthrew a king. It's strange, isn't it? That in a world of ziggurats and plowshares, of debt slavery and flood myths, someone once thought, you know what we need? A beautiful, fragile thing that serves no function except to help us pretend we're in charge for an hour. And somehow, 4,600 years later, we still agree. You glance once more at the inlaid board. It gleams in the fading light, an ancient answer to an unspoken question. What do you do when you've tamed the river, counted the sheep, and prayed all the prayers you can stomach? Simple. You roll the dice. You step out into the street again, but your mind's still rattling, like the dice you just watched fly across a polished board. You look down and spot something half buried near a courtyard drain, a small chipped pyramid of clay. It might have once been painted, maybe red or blue. You pick it up and realize it's a die, or more accurately, a cousin to the modern die, a tetrahedron with 4 numbered points. You give it a little toss onto a nearby bench. It clinks, lands on its side, and for a moment you expect something to happen. A result, a curse, an explosion of cheering, nothing. But that's the power of it, isn't it? This tiny thing once carried weight. Divine weight. In Sumerian culture, dice weren't just tools of chance, they were vessels for meaning. They collapsed the chaos of the universe into a few possible outcomes and let humans believe they could navigate the will of the gods with a flick of the wrist. Playing dice was not unlike poking the universe with a stick and asking, so, now what? You follow the sound of a commotion. 2 young men standing over a worn game board yelling. One is convinced his opponent is cheating. The other claims the dice are cursed. You stand off to the side trying to act invisible like you're just a cloud spirit with a healthy sense of boundaries. One of them makes the roll again, and there it is. A low, gasping cheer from the crowd. A perfect toss. All 4 points showing white. A lucky strike. Fringe tidbit. In some digs near Uruk, archaeologists found dice paired with tiny incantation tablets, short phrases meant to be recited before rolling. Think of them like Mesopotamian cheat codes. May Nana guide this throw, or may the dice land as smoothly as beer into a cup. The line between magic and gaming was thinner than we'd like to admit. Historians still argue whether these early games truly relied on randomness or if skilled throws, and maybe loaded dice, were part of the equation. One scholar even posited that Sumerians might have trained certain fingers for better tossing angles, like ancient craps hustlers in linen skirts. You imagine a streetwise teen teaching his little brother how to roll with flair. But whatever the truth, one thing's certain: people believed. Not always in luck, but in the patterns, in the possibility that the universe could whisper answers through bone-shaped tools. Of course, not all rolls brought joy. You sit in on another game nearby. This one's quieter, the players older, the stakes higher. Not wealth, not property, maybe just pride or memory or something deeper. One man rolls and lands on a square. The other flinches, clearly recognizing what it means. The losing piece is removed and you sense the tension rise. They've played this game before, many times, and every loss carries with it the weight of 1,000 silent grudges. That's the thing about early board games. They weren't just diversions, they were performances, status indicators, trials of character. The way someone reacted to a lucky roll or a bitter loss could reveal their soul, or at least their temper. You hear a story from a boy sweeping outside. He says his uncle once lost 3 goats and a promised marriage over a game gone wrong. The bride's family took the loss as a divine sign. The goats probably didn't get a vote. You nod, pretending to be surprised. But you're not. You've seen enough by now to know board games here weren't safe. They were layered, they were unpredictable, and they were deeply, deeply emotional. You walk again. Somewhere behind you, another cheer erupts. Someone else just got the roll they needed, or maybe didn't. The dice clatter again, and you realize you've started listening for them like thunder. Not just because they mark the game, but because they echo something else. Something buried, twitchy, primal. The need to feel chosen. To believe that your random number meant more than someone else's. That the gods smiled on you, not just for today, but for keeps. And when they didn't, well, you blamed the dice. You shuffle into a shaded courtyard where a breeze drifts lazily through hanging linens, and the smell of roasting garlic mixes with something floral, probably perfume from a cracked amphora nearby. The light here is soft, the chatter hushed. A family has gathered around a low table. The board in front of them is familiar, rows of inlaid squares, worn pieces shaped like birds and lions, though one has clearly been replaced with a pebble. At first glance, it looks like fun. At second glance, not so much. The tension is thick. One player leans forward with the intensity of someone reviewing a legal contract. Another is pursing their lips so hard they might collapse into themselves like a deflated wineskin. A third, probably the youngest, is openly sulking and muttering what you think is the Sumerian equivalent of, "This game is rigged." You've just walked into the oldest known version of Family Game Night Meltdown. One move later, there's a sharp intake of breath. The eldest player has made a bold play, aggressive, risky, and it just paid off. The others groan. One accuses him of making up rules. Another demands a replay of the last turn. The youngest storms off entirely. Tradition. Historians still argue whether Sumerian games followed fixed communal rules or if each household developed their own. Some boards found in tombs show scribbled instructions, barely legible, possibly improvised, while others suggest rigid systems passed down orally. In short, even back then, arguing about the rules was half the fun. But what's interesting isn't just the game mechanics, it's the stakes. Losing wasn't just annoying, it was reputational. For adults, it could mean diminished status. For children, it might mark you as unlucky or impulsive. And for elders, a loss might signal that your wisdom wasn't so sharp anymore. Oof, fringe tidbit? Some texts hint at matchmaking rituals tied to gameplay. Think, win the game. win the date. One recovered fragment refers to a festival contest where suitors played strategy games in front of eligible spectators. You can imagine the pressure. Checkmate might have meant, I'll take your sheep and your daughter. And then there's the drama. One clay tablet records a case, half complaint, half poem, where a noble accuses his cousin of conspiring with a servant to cheat at a racing game. The language is flowery, but the gist is, he lied. He moved twice, and now my honor is in the gutter. The game, apparently, ended with someone knocking the board off the table and storming into the street. Some theories suggest that games served as emotional safety valves, a socially acceptable way to express aggression without, unleashing a citywide feud. You watch another round play out. The eldest wins again. Everyone sighs in defeat. But instead of gloating, he gently tips his piece and steps back from the board. He gestures for the youngest to sit in. A teaching moment, a way to pass knowledge, not just of the game, but of composure, calculation, patience. You suddenly see how this tradition works. Games here weren't just games. They were stagecraft, lessons, microcosms of the wider world. The Sumerian concept of me, a divine essence passed from gods to humans, covered not only things like farming or law, but also joyful heart, heroism, and even competitive play. To master a game wasn't simply to win. It was to engage with the divine order of things. And yet, beneath all that cosmic significance, it still stings when your cousin beats you 4 times in a row with dumb luck and smug eyebrows. You step away as another game begins. This one's quieter. No stakes, no shouting. Just 2 friends passing time before the sun sets. Their conversation drifts from board moves to gossip to dreams. And the board, once again, becomes a meeting ground. A place for rituals of another kind. You find yourself beneath the long shadow of a ziggurat, the sandstone steps glowing gold in the late afternoon sun. At its base, near a dusty side entrance flanked by chipped lion statues, you hear the dull tap-tap of carving. Not heavy hammering, more delicate than that. Intentional, rhythmic. You round the corner and see him. A young apprentice priest with a chisel and a half-finished slab of soft limestone. He's not building an altar. He's etching what looks like a game board. It's a curious design, an array of grids shaped like stepped pyramids, with tiny holes near certain corners and animal symbols etched along one edge. You crouch to get a better look. The symbols aren't decorative, they're tokens. Or at least they will be. A lion, a goat, a scorpion. The creatures are stylized, stiff-legged and sharp-eyed, and you can tell they're meant to move. But this isn't just a craft project. It's training. Historians still argue whether these priest apprentices used games to sharpen their wits, memorize religious texts, or test predictions. Some even believe that sacred geometry, the mathematical ratios found in temple design, was encoded into board layouts, turning every match into a symbolic reenactment of cosmic order. You shift slightly, and the apprentice flinches, nearly slipping. His master, seated nearby with arms folded like thunderclouds, shoots him a look sharp enough to scar pottery. Apparently, the stakes here are spiritual and military, because as the board nears completion, you realize something else. This isn't just a game, it's a simulation. The pieces, when they arrive, carved from bone and jet, are soldiers. Their movement mimics strategy, flanking, retreating, capturing. This is a model war. You've just stumbled into the tactical birth of tabletop gaming. Fringe tidbit? One theory suggests that some Sumerian games were used to plan or teach battlefield maneuvers. Small pegs and tokens allowed commanders to replay possible scenarios, an ancient war room in miniature. It's the ancestor of chess, Risk, and every hex grid strategy game that's ever caused a friendship to end at 3 a.m. Of course, not every token represented a warrior. Some were stylized deities, others were ancestral spirits. Occasionally, a piece was deliberately misformed, missing an eye, for example, to represent a cursed unit. You begin to understand just how much narrative was packed into these palm-sized dramas. You sit in on a practice match. Two initiates square off, brows furrowed, lips moving silently as they calculate each turn. One piece shifts forward, the other retreats. A third leaps a row. The board tilts toward one side. The losing player suddenly stops, gestures toward the lion token, and claims divine interference. The master sighs and resets the board, and you realize these weren't just games for the players. They were theater for the onlookers. In temples, plazas, and courtyards, spectators watched games like parables, teaching them about strategy, fate, pride, and punishment. A bad move might be interpreted not just as poor planning, but as moral weakness. A good move, proof of divine favor. And sometimes, that performance spilled into politics. One legend, passed down in fragments, speaks of a high priest who challenged a rival to a public game during a festival. The match was dramatic. Days long, spectators gambled, musicians played. In the final moments, the priest made a move so brilliant, so unexpected, that the crowd gasped and the rival stepped down from office 2 days later. Historians still debate whether it really happened or if it was temple PR gone wild. Either way, the myth stuck. A game became a kingmaker. You glance back at the board in progress. The apprentice is smoothing a corner now, humming under his breath, a little more confident with each stroke. His fingers are calloused, but his eyes shine. He's not just making a toy. He's constructing a world. And you feel something shift inside you, an understanding maybe, that games here were never just about winning. They were about making sense of war, of religion, of chaos. They let people shrink terrifying concepts into something you could see, hold, and sometimes defeat. You stand. The temple looms above, timeless and silent. But at its base, a game board, waiting to begin. You make your way down a narrow side street where the sun bounces off whitewashed walls and the air smells faintly of baked clay and sweet beer. Around the corner you hear a voice, sing-songy, slightly bored, reciting something aloud. You follow the sound. Inside a small shop front, half stuffed with scrolls, amphorae, and loose baskets of grain, a scribe is hunched over a clay tablet. He's working fast, stylus tapping in bursts as he murmurs, 4 sheep, 2 jars, 1 silver clasp, and then pauses, picks up a small cube, and flicks it across the surface of the table. You blink. He's playing dice, right next to an official tax inventory. You stick around, quiet as a shadow, and you start to notice the pattern. He writes, he sighs, he rolls, he adjusts something. It's not cheating, it's not procrastination, it's calibration. Games, it turns out, leaked everywhere in Sumer, even into the dusty routines of accounting. Historians still argue whether some Sumerian scribes developed shorthand calculations by way of board-based abstractions, using movement on grids to help with inventory checks, ratios, or transaction audits. In a world without calculators, turning business into a game might have been the smartest way to stay sane. The scribe notices you, barely, and gestures toward a tablet on a side shelf. It's thin, cracked, and covered in chicken scratch wedge marks, but you can just make out the structure. A game log, a record of matches played. Someone was keeping score. You scan another tablet beside it, half a poem, half a complaint, describing a long afternoon of losing over and over again to someone named Lugal Malik the Smirker. Apparently, the author believed Lugal was secretly using weighted dice. His throws roll straight like fish on a priest's line, the writer grumbles. You feel that. Fringe tidbit. In one Sumerian letter, a merchant complains that his caravan was delayed because his guards refused to leave a game mid-match. He uses the word tugzar, often translated as grip or entanglement, to describe the hold the game had on them. He compares it to the hunger that grabs a man even while he eats. That's right. Board game addiction predates electricity. You wander out back, where the shopkeeper's daughter is sketching something in the dirt. Little squares, circles, arrows. She's making her own board game. You kneel beside her, and she explains the rules in a breathless mix of numbers, names, and pure chaos. Something about traders, curses, and a magic sheep that can fly if you roll a 6. It's brilliant. It's nonsense. It's perfect. And it mirrors something deeper. The Sumerians didn't just play games. They documented them, named them, bragged about them, complained about losing them in poetic meter. Games weren't just pastimes. They were part of the bureaucratic bloodstream. Even priests, with all their incense and omens, sometimes scribbled game references into temple records. One theory suggests that the ancient game of Mayhem, later played in Egypt, might have migrated from Sumerian trade networks, passed along with lapis lazuli and religious hymns. In other words, they were exporting play. And wherever the games went, the gossip followed. You catch snippets of it at the next stall over, 2 weavers complaining about a friend who takes too long to make decisions and always blames the gods when he loses. You've heard that exact conversation at a modern game night, possibly last week. Games didn't just reveal character, they revealed social glue. Who trusted whom? Who bluffed well? Who lost gracefully? Who didn't? They became currency for relationships. You picture a scribe writing a letter to his cousin in another city. Shipment arrived, board game included. Still think you cheat, but miss you terribly. Enclosed, 5 new rules. Ignore them at your peril. You chuckle, then stop. Because just over the ridge, smoke is rising. Another temple fire? A burnt offering? Or just lunch gone wrong? You can't tell. But you do know that somewhere in that smoke, someone's rolling dice, and someone else is about to accuse them of cheating. You wander farther down a sun-bleached road until the buildings thin and the air starts to smell like dust, sweat, and old arguments. You're near what passes for a school, the Scribes' Academy tucked into a series of cramped rooms off a courtyard. It's loud, frustrated, a little smoky, and it reeks of chalk, oil, and ink. Inside, students kneel beside tablets, muttering multiplication tables and vocabulary drills while scribes bark corrections like overworked drill sergeants. But over in the corner, just out of the teacher's line of sight, a few students have abandoned their assignments. They're huddled around a makeshift board, scratched into a plank of discarded pottery, and moving game pieces like their lives depend on it. And maybe they do. You watch for a moment. There's a strategy to it. Careful placements, hesitations before each turn. A running commentary of insults and bravado. This isn't a race game. It's a battle of wits. One player lures another into a trap. A feint, a sacrifice. The others groan with admiration or disgust. You'd swear one of them mutters, "Rookie move," in Sumerian. Historians still argue whether the Sumerians distinguished between games of chance and games of skill. Some boards suggest random dice-based movement, while others show deliberate layouts, complex enough to imply planning and forethought. Either way, this is no coin toss. This is the root of chess, of poker, of every long grudge that started with someone muttering, "You fell for that." Fringe tidbit. In one surviving text fragment, a teacher reprimands a student not for playing a game, but for losing too easily. The line reads, roughly, "Your mind slides like bad ink. Be a sharper read." Apparently, even then, the ability to strategize was as prized as memorizing your king lists. And it makes sense. This was a world that valued planners, bureaucrats, priests who could interpret eclipses, generals who could anticipate ambushes, scribes who could make a tax record look like divine law. Board games didn't just entertain, they taught. You watch as one student makes a decisive move. The others pause, jaws slack. There's a moment of silence, then one of them blurts, "You were setting that up since turn 3?" The player shrugs, smug and serene, as if he just turned water into beer. And suddenly it hits you. Strategy isn't just about winning. It's about timing, about restraint, about seeing 3 moves ahead while pretending you don't even know the rules. And here, in a sunlit corner of a crumbling academy, a teenager has just achieved enlightenment through a series of flattened clay squares. The teacher notices the game at last and storms over, muttering about wasted time and what would Enlil think. The students scatter like pigeons, clutching their styluses and looking very innocent. But one boy glances back, grinning, already replaying the match in his mind. You step outside, chuckling, and nearly trip over a half-buried board embedded in the courtyard stone. It's worn, more symbol than tool now, but still legible. Someone carved it there long ago, maybe to sneak in one more match during lunch break. And it's not just here. You start noticing them everywhere. Tiny grids and spirals scratched into walls, steps, low benches, even the backs of tablets. Games weren't contained. They spilled out of the schools and into the city like gossip. They became part of the fabric. And with them came questions. Was this fair? Was that legal? Did you play well, or just get lucky? You realize this ancient civilization, famous for inventing writing, taxes, and the wheel, was also quietly obsessed with a more subtle invention: balance. The line between order and chaos, between knowledge and instinct, between rules and freedom. And what better place to explore that than a board small enough to fit on your lap? You drift into a quieter district now, where the buildings are lower, the fences wobbly, and the shouting is a little more playful. It's where families live, where goats are allowed to wander without supervision, and reed mats lie abandoned under shady trees. It smells like earth and milk and last night's lentils. And somewhere nearby, a child is shrieking with laughter. You follow the sound past a row of broken pots and around a stack of fishing nets until you stumble upon a scene straight out of every era. A group of kids inventing a game as they go. There's no formal board, just a stick-drawn path winding through the dirt. Pebbles serve as tokens. A chicken is definitely part of the game, though it seems unaware. One child tosses a small stone, then hops forward shouting something that might mean trap or "you're dead," or just "I made this up 5 seconds ago." Another kid falls dramatically, clutching their leg. A third declares herself queen of the river and banishes everyone to the desert of stinky socks, which is just the side of the alley with more garbage. The rules are chaos. The joy is very real. Historians still argue whether children's games in Sumer were miniature versions of adult pastimes, or if they developed their own parallel play cultures. There's evidence for both. One set of game tokens found near a schoolhouse was small enough to be swallowed, which suggests either child-specific designs or a very risky lunch break. Fringe tidbit. In a dig near Nipper, archaeologists uncovered a board covered in sharp wedge marks and jagged little drawings, what appeared to be a child's attempt to replicate a grown-up's game. The rules, if there were any, are lost. But the board included one piece, shaped like a duck, wearing what looked like a crown. You've never felt closer to a Sumerian 7-year-old. Back in your alley, the chicken makes a break for it and 2 kids chase it, which somehow resets the game. The queen becomes a goat. The goat becomes a wizard. The wizard trips. The laughter starts over, and you begin to see the thread. Play isn't just imitation. It's practice. It's experiment. It's the place where future scribes, traders, priests, and laborers figure out how the world might work if they had control over even a sliver of it. Today, it's pebbles in the dirt. Tomorrow, it's a carved board with inherited rules. The day after that, it's a contract, a prediction, a war plan. Games, you realize, are where the Sumerians first learned how to hold power in their hands, even the small ones, even if it was pretend. You pause and watch one older child help a younger one fix her token, a broken bit of shell that now looks like a tiny fish. She gives it a name. "This is Sea Bite," she says. "He has 5 powers." No one questions it. It becomes canon instantly. And this is storytelling. You're watching mythology form in real time, not from temple hymns or kingly decrees, but from giggles and compromises and what-ifs. The same children who play pretend wars today will one day learn real battle formations. The ones who bend rules now might write them later. Even the kid who keeps changing sides mid-game might grow up to invent politics. The chicken returns, pecks at a piece of bread, and is redeclared queen. You smile and slip away. And as you do, you realize something gentle but profound. Even in a society that prized record-keeping and rule enforcement, there was always room for chaos, for imagination, for little hands to shuffle tokens across a line of dirt and declare victory, or magic, or peace. You glance back once more. The queen chicken has now been replaced by a sock puppet. Naturally, you cross a shallow canal where laundry flaps between trees like lazy flags and a fisherman naps beside a pile of eels that are definitely plotting something. The city around you hums, low, rhythmic, cooperative. Sumerian life was never solitary. You were always part of a group, a household, a temple network, a trade guild, a family so extended it included people you'd never actually met, but were still somehow obligated to bring figs to. And games? Games held that world together. You duck under a lintel into a courtyard where a game is in full swing. Not the quiet, intense kind. This is loud, public, performative. People are gathered in a semicircle, clapping, jeering, placing bets, offering commentary that is both unhelpful and deeply entertaining. There's a board on a bench. The players are 2 men, both sweaty and grinning. Their movements are theatrical. Every piece they move earns cheers or groans. This isn't just fun. It's glue. It's grease on the gears of city life. Historians still argue whether such open-air games were sanctioned social events or just tolerated chaos. But what's clear is that they happened a lot. Not just for family bonding or personal pride, but for diplomacy, mediation, group dynamics. A tense situation between neighbors? Settle it with a match. 2 trade partners unsure about fairness? Share a drink, roll the dice, and see who fate favors. Fringe tidbit. A fragmentary record from Lagash describes an annual gathering where neighboring districts competed in festival games. Athletics, yes, but also tabletop contests. The prize? Honor, bragging rights, and, weirdly, a goat painted entirely blue. You hear whispers behind you, two women leaning in, arguing about one of the players. He always starts strong, but he never sees the trap coming. Like his marriage, the other replies. They burst into laughter. The game continues. A risky move, a dramatic gasp, a long silence, and then cheering. One player leaps up, arms wide. The other bows, dramatically conceding. The onlookers applaud. One small child immediately tries to climb the bench and imitate the winner's final move, knocking over half the pieces. You watch as the crowd begins to disperse, but the energy lingers. Someone says, "We'll do it again next week." Another mutters, "I'll bring better tokens." Someone else says, "That was rigged," but they're smiling. And it dawns on you. Games weren't just about internal competition. They were communal rituals, rehearsals for conflict, microdramas where people could be clever, bold, deceitful, or noble, without burning down the city in the process. But not every game brought people together. You wander into another quarter, this one less festive. Two men are in a heated argument, faces red, arms waving. One clutches a game piece like it's evidence in a trial. The other shouts something that might translate to, "You always do this." Turns out, games could divide just as easily. A clay tablet tucked into a residential archive once described an incident during a midsummer festival where a single disputed role led to an actual brawl. Pots were broken. Offerings were trampled. One unlucky onlooker fell into a ceremonial fire pit. Don't worry, it was only warm at the time. The board snapped in half. It later became the center of an apology ritual, re-glued, painted gold, and used to heal community wounds. Because in Sumer, as in life, the same tool that builds connection can spark a feud. A joke misread, a rule bent, a win taken too seriously. Still, they kept playing, because the need outweighed the risk. You find a quiet bench and sit, thinking. The shouting has faded. The crowds moved on. But in the grooves of the worn wood beneath your hand, you feel the pattern of a game long since erased by wind and time. And in that pattern, unity, rivalry, laughter, frustration, the social script of a civilization trying to stay human. One turn at a time. You wake early, before the sun has finished dragging its orange face above the rooftops, and follow the camel tracks east. The city thins. The mud brick gives way to scrub. In the distance, caravans shuffle like slow beetles across the plain. Bells clink. Hooves tap. Trade has arrived. And with it, games. A merchant caravan from Dilmun has just pulled into the outskirts of Ur. The travelers are dusty, sunburnt, and unbothered. They've done this before. As they unpack jars of resin and bundles of dyed cloth, a few sit down beside a flat rock, pull out a board with shell inlay, and start to play. You recognize the shape. It's not quite Sumerian. A different pattern, foreign tokens. The dice are cube-shaped, not tetrahedrons. The rules are unfamiliar, but the laughter, the groans, the overly dramatic lost cries, all universal. One of the locals joins in. They struggle a bit with the rhythm of play. The foreigner grins and lets it slide. They adjust. By round 3, there's a small crowd. A kid asks to touch the pieces. A grandmother clucks her tongue and mutters something probably translated as, "Our games are better." She stays to watch anyway. Historians still argue whether these imported games were fully adopted or adapted, whether they fused into Sumerian traditions or were treated as exotic novelties. Some excavation sites show hybrid boards, local materials with foreign layouts. Others include loan rules, scribbled like annotations onto existing designs. Fringe tidbit: one board unearthed near the Persian Gulf was made of driftwood, embedded with crushed glass, and included a mix of Sumerian and Indus Valley symbology. It might have belonged to a trader who couldn't decide which culture's game was more fun, so he just mashed them together. You watch as the crowd around the game swells. Wagers begin. Somebody produces a clay jar of beer. By mid-morning, 2 kids have started crafting their own version of the game nearby using bits of old fruit and animal bones. The cycle begins again. This wasn't just cultural exchange, it was cultural currency. Owning an exotic board meant you had connections. Playing one meant you were worldly. Teaching it to others, that made you a celebrity, at least for the afternoon. And the flip side, copycats. You overhear one merchant grumble that his exact board design had been stolen, duplicated, and now half the scribes in Lagash were selling knockoffs. They even got the rosette wrong, he says, deeply offended. It's not supposed to have wings. You hide your smirk and move on. In another courtyard, a group of young elites are playing what they claim is the Dillman Champions game. One boasts that his cousin invented a variant with better balance. Another scoffs and says he met a Babylonian who plays it upside down. Someone rolls a die and it bounces dramatically into a fishbowl. This isn't just entertainment. It's trend, status. The ancient version of owning the hottest app, complete with in-game drama and confusing patch notes. And it's spreading fast. A new game could sweep across cities in weeks, thanks to traders, scribes, and temple envoys. Sometimes they traveled with tiny clay replicas of boards, used like today's travel chess sets. One particularly wealthy merchant commissioned an ivory version with folding wings, hinge intact. Yes, the first known portable board game, prehistoric carry-on luggage. You finally wander into a shop filled with imported goods, glass beads, foreign spices, and tucked in a display niche, an oddly shaped game board shaped like a crescent moon. You've never seen it before. The shopkeeper sees your interest, leans in and whispers, "Rules extra." Of course they are. You look down at the crescent board, its surface shining faintly in the morning light, and you think about what this means. That play isn't just local, it's migratory. It carries stories, rules, customs, sometimes whole identities with it. And when it lands in a new place, it doesn't just sit still. It takes root. You step back into the heart of the city now, past the traders, past the weavers, past the haggling over date syrup prices, and into a small square building that hums with quiet intensity. No laughter here, no drifting music or clattering dice. This is the scribal quarter, the brain of the beast. You cross the threshold into a low-lit room where 5 students sit in stiff rows, styluses poised like daggers. They're copying legal codes, word for word, dot by dot, line by exhausting line. It smells like clay dust and dried reeds. Someone sneezes. No one acknowledges it. This is sacred space. And in the far corner, just barely out of sight, is a board. Not flashy, no shell inlay, no wild colors, just a flat clay tile etched with a grid and tiny indentations. A few bone counters rest beside it, arranged just so. You recognize the setup now. This isn't a racing game. This is something different. This is logic. One scribe glances up from his tablet. His eyes dart to the board, then back to his work. Another does the same. There's a rhythm to it, a pause, a recalibration, almost like they're using the game as a palate cleanser for the mind. You sit and watch. A student finishes a line of cuneiform, stretches his fingers, and drifts over to the board. He moves one counter 3 spaces, thinks, moves another one back, pauses. Then he returns to his writing. This is the Sumerian version of Sudoku, of Minesweeper, of the crossword puzzle wedged into a Monday morning meeting. It's a tool, a training ground, a reset button for an overworked brain. Historians still argue whether these logic-based boards were strictly educational or if they evolved into full-blown games over time. Some excavated tablets describe tests of the squares, which might have been early pattern-based strategy games, or just really mean math problems in disguise. Fringe tidbit. One scribe school in Sippar had a clay wall etched with game sequences. Not records of matches, but problems to be solved. They even included impossible setups where no legal moves were left. It may have been an early form of trick question, or teacher torture. You spot another board in the adjoining room, this one more elaborate. A grid, yes, but with symbolic marks in each square. Stars, rivers, fish, plows. The counters are shaped like tools. 2 students are playing quietly. One gestures toward a fish square and whispers, "The river floods." 2 turns lost. The other nods solemnly. You realize they're role-playing, simulating harvests, decisions, problems to solve. They've turned agriculture into a board game. Sumeria's Settlers of Catan, minus the sheep trading. And why not? This was a civilization of data lovers, obsessed with inventories, crop cycles, ratios, and tallies. They turned the cosmos into a ledger and prayed in spreadsheets. For them, a game was more than play. It was practice, for life, for management, for coping with gods who might send a drought just because you forgot to sprinkle the right herbs on Tuesday. You look closer at the pieces. One is shaped like a lightning bolt, another like a broken pot. There's a space labeled famine. This isn't about winning. It's about understanding the system, navigating uncertainty, seeing how far your plan holds before the sky falls. One student laughs quietly after losing 3 turns to a locust tile. His partner shrugs. Should have stored more grain. You nod, invisible. Because this is where the Sumerian genius really shines. Not just in invention, but in simulation. In the desire to compress the terrifying sprawl of real life into a world small enough to fit on a table, where you could plan, adapt, rewind. You rise and look around, boards tucked into corners, students side-eyeing them while writing up lists of oxen and debts. Somewhere, a teacher coughs and one of the players casually wipes the board clean like nothing happened. But you saw it. You saw how knowledge, true knowledge, wasn't just recorded. It was rehearsed. And sometimes, it moved 3 squares to the left and captured your last goat. It's twilight now. The street's quiet. Market stalls shuttered. Smoke curling gently from rooftop ovens. You follow a narrow lane toward the temple district again. Not the grand ziggurat with its echoing steps, but a smaller shrine tucked beside a canal, fragrant with incense and crushed petals. A few worshippers murmur prayers, casting crumbs into the water. Inside, the glow is soft. Lamp oil flickers. A priest chants in a low, almost conversational tone. You duck your head, respectful, and let your eyes adjust. And there it is, beside the altar. A game board. Not just any board. This one is stone, heavy, inlaid with lapis lazuli and polished obsidian. The playing squares form a spiral, interlocked with symbols you've only seen on temple inscriptions. The Eye of Ishtar, the 7 stars of the Pleiades, the river glyph that signifies divine passage. The game pieces, they're shaped like tiny humans. Some wear crowns, one has wings, one is missing a head. This isn't entertainment. This is a ritual. Historians still argue whether sacred games like this were metaphors, prophecies, or straight-up spells. Some believe priests used them to channel divine guidance, asking questions, making moves, watching the outcomes. A kind of playable horoscope. Others think the games were didactic, spiritual lessons about humility, patience, balance. Fringe tidbit. One inscription refers to a game called Steps to the Sky Gate, where players ascended a spiral track representing the soul's journey through trials. The final square bore the word Zakar, believed to mean peace, silence, or possibly victory. Maybe all three. You watch as a priest lights a bit of resin, waves the smoke across the board, and begins to play alone. Every move is slow, reverent. He whispers after each one, not to himself, to someone else. You strain to hear. He's asking questions. The game, it seems, is answering. Each move on the board becomes an omen, a trial, a turning point in a cosmic story. The player becomes the hero. The path becomes the world. A bad roll, a flood, a missed space, illness, a perfect match of symbols, divine favor. This isn't so far from the racing games or tactical boards you've seen all day, but here, the stakes are different. There's no opponent, just the player and the gods. It dawns on you. For the Sumerians, the boundary between sacred and secular was porous. They didn't draw neat lines between playing and praying. A game could be frivolous one day and divinely loaded the next. The same board might teach a child strategy and guide a priest through a difficult decision. And in a culture where signs were everywhere, in stars, dreams, liver slices, and yes, dice throws, that kind of dual use wasn't strange. It was necessary. You notice, too, that the temple's apprentices are watching the priest's moves, not interfering, just memorizing, absorbing the ritual, learning the choreography of the sacred board. And you wonder how many generations have passed this way, hands hovering over the same stones, lips murmuring the same prayers, each believing that if the game ends just right, something bigger might shift in the real world. You look closer at the pieces. They're worn smooth by centuries of fingertips. Some are chipped, others lovingly repaired with gold. Every scar is a story, every move a negotiation with mystery. The priest finishes the game. He exhales, lights another bit of resin, then carefully resets the board. One apprentice kneels. The next round begins. You step back into the night, the temple at your back, and realize this wasn't just recreation. It wasn't even strategy. It was reverence. The board was an altar. The moves, a liturgy. The pattern, a kind of surrender. Because when the gods are unknowable and the world turns on a whim, you make meaning where you can. Even if it's shaped like a spiral and fits in your hands, the night deepens. The breeze is cooler now, carrying the smells of extinguished hearths and distant river water. You pass sleeping goats, snoring guards, and a pottery wheel still spinning from someone's late shift. The city, for the first time, feels tired. You find yourself near the edge of town, where the walls are lower and cracked with age, the houses more scattered. This is the older part of partially crumbled, partially buried, where old stories hang in the air like cobwebs. You step carefully, and then you see it. A forgotten courtyard, half overgrown, a fig tree pushing its way through a broken wall. In the corner, a board, carved directly into the stone. It's worn nearly smooth, but you recognize the shape. A variation on the royal game of but the layout's different. Simpler, maybe. Or just different enough to mean something else entirely. The grooves are deep from centuries of fingertips. One edge is cracked. Moss lines the crevices. No pieces remain, no dice, no players, just silence and moonlight. You sit, and you listen. Because the board speaks in a way, not with words but with presence. It's a survivor, a fossil of joy, of ritual, of rivalry, and also of neglect. Time, like a careless player, scattered its pieces and walked away mid-turn. Historians still argue whether abandoned boards like this were left behind by choice, buried intentionally, or simply forgotten as new games and new gods came into fashion. Some suggest the fall of Sumerian game culture coincided with Babylonian dominance, whose own games took center stage. Others say it was slower, a soft fading, a generation too busy, a shift in taste. Fringe tidbit: one researcher proposed that a massive drought may have ended not just crops, but leisure. No grain, no games, she wrote. It sounds bleak, but you understand. If life becomes about survival, then sitting down to race carved stones across a board might start to feel indulgent. But you also wonder, what if someone just got bored? What if the players moved, married, died, and no one thought to keep the rules? What if a new child saw the board and thought it was decoration, or a warning, or a map, and invented something else entirely? You touch the stone. It's cold, steady. The grooves still fit your finger. And in that moment, you realize something quiet but enormous. Most things vanish. But patterns linger. They get passed down, not as full instructions, but as instincts. The rhythm of taking turns, the tension of a risk, the thrill of a final move, the shape of a square that feels like victory. Maybe the Sumerians didn't vanish. Maybe they just folded into the next set of players. You think back on all the boards you've seen today, some pristine, some improvised, some sacred, some silly, and all of them, every single one, offered something their players needed. Escape, connection, understanding, power, peace. You wonder how many boards never got unearthed, how many tokens were swept away by wind or war or disinterest, how many rules are lost forever, forgotten not because they were useless, but because the game outgrew them. And then you look around. Even here in the half-light you see echoes, scratches on a wall, a groove on a doorstep, faint shapes that might once have been grids, like the city itself was a board and someone just walked away mid-match. You stand. And for a second, you imagine what it would be like to pick up where they left off, to find the rules again, to play, not in spite of the ending, but because of it. You leave the ruined courtyard behind, walking slowly now, guided more by instinct than direction. The moon is high, the air is still. The streets of lie in soft shadow, ancient walls casting long memories. Somewhere a lyre plays a single, lingering note, then fades. Somewhere else, a reed curtain flaps quietly in the breeze. You find one last square, not a temple, not a home, just a small public space with low benches, a few scattered pots, and an old woman sitting alone. In front of her, a board. Nothing fancy, a simple grid scratched into a slab. The pieces are mismatched, bits of bone, shell, a broken amulet, even what looks like the worn tooth of a sheep. She notices you, smiles gently, and pats the ground beside her. You sit. She gestures to the board. moves a piece, waits. You move one in response. No words pass between you. None are needed. The rules are half remembered, half intuited. Maybe she's playing the real game. Maybe she's making it up. Maybe she just wanted someone to play with. You move another piece, she traps it. Of course she does. Historians still argue whether the Sumerians played games to teach, to win, to divine the future, or just to feel present, to make sense of the unpredictable by creating something knowable, a small world with rules and pieces that did what they were told. Fringe tidbit is an old Babylonian saying scratched on the side of a bowl. The gods play games, but men throw the dice. Scholars can't quite agree on the translation. Some say it means we imitate the divine through play. Others think it means the gods cheat. Honestly, both sound right. The old woman wins again. She doesn't gloat, just gives you a look like you'll get there and begins to reset the board. You lean back, eyes soft, breath slow. You're not tired, not exactly, but your body is ready to rest. The rhythm of play has quieted your thoughts, like a lullaby in the shape of a spiral, like a story you forgot you remembered. And here, under a sky the Sumerians once charted, in a city they built from mud and mathematics, you feel something settle, a connection, not to the game, but to the impulse behind it. Because games, in the end, are the echoes of hope. They let us believe that chance can be fair, that patience pays off, that the next move might change everything. And when they don't, well, there's always another round. The woman gathers her pieces, nods once, you nod back, and the city of Ur exhales. So now, let your eyes close, if they haven't already. You've walked the streets of a vanished world. You've watched gods be courted with dice. You've seen children reinvent rules on the fly, and elders bury wisdom in patterns. You've sat beside priests who treated a spiral of stones like a conversation with the stars. And you've played, quietly, in the dark, with someone who remembers what most have forgotten. You've felt the weight of 5,000 years ease into silence. Let that pattern echo in you now. The rhythm of breath, the give and take of turns, that simple promise. Move, then wait. The rules don't need to be perfect, only steady. Let your thoughts, like old game pieces, find their place and stop. Let the ancient dust settle across your mind, soft and slow. Let the board fade, not because the game is over, but because the game is always there when you need it. A place of quiet order, a shape made of choice, a map that means nothing and everything. And now, with the city of Ur sleeping behind your eyes, let the final square be yours, where nothing moves, where you have already won. And nothing more is asked of you, not tonight.